You went through New York in, what was the day? Was it 2002?
It was September 26, 2002.
September 26, 2002, and you were stopped by the immigration officials.
Correct.
Was that the first time that had happened to you?
Well, I had traveled extensively within the U.S. because I had a job in Boston just prior to that incident, and it never happened to me. That was the first time when I was asked to pull aside, and eventually I was interrogated by the FBI.
But before that, you had never been pulled aside before?
Well, there was one small incident on the way back from Boston to Ottawa, actually at the Canadian immigration, but it was just a small incident compared to what happened to me.
Was it related though? Did it seem to, like, did a red flag
we now know that it was related. We now know that all this started with the Canadian police sending misleading and false information to their American counterparts. We now know a lot more than what we knew back then.
What was the origin of that? I mean, how did this whole thing get started about you?
Apparently, the RCMP, which is the equivalent of the FBI in Canada, I became part of, or I became an interest for them because they saw me talking to someone they were interested in, and from that they concluded all sorts of things very quickly. They sent down this information to the FBI. Most of that information was either exaggerated information or sometimes misleading. And I was labeled, for example, in some of this communication as Al-Qaeda operative or a member of Al-Qaeda without any evidence. So that basically became part of the records the FBI had prior to them interrogating me.
I think it's one of the things that induces fear about this story is the sense that you're living what you consider a normal life, and yet there's this case being built against you without you knowing about it. And I'm curious how that case was started. And I guess there was an ongoing investigation about
Apparently,
someone else that
yes.
Somehow they linked you to via what, phone calls?
That's right. That's right. There was an investigation about many individuals in Canada. That was started by the RCMP immediately after 9/11, and basically CSIS, which is the equivalent of CIA here in Canada, transferred the files of those people they were surveilling to the RCMP for investigation, for criminal investigation. I was not part of that file, but I was seen talking to one of the people under investigation. But what is ironic about all of this is that all those people that they tried to link me to have been cleared eventually. And that is what is really strange about the whole, it just speaks of incompetence on the part of the police.
Really, no one in that group ended up being linked to Al-Qaeda?
That's right. No one in that group was proven to be part of Al-Qaeda or a member of Al-Qaeda or related to any terrorist. In fact, there were 2 inquiries in Canada. The first one cleared me of any terrorism-related suspicion, and the other inquiry, which is called the Akabuchi inquiry, cleared the other individuals. So I believe what happened is there was a rush on the part of the investigators to arrive to conclusions, and they did not analyze the information they had in their possession in a very professional manner, put it that way. And they quickly rushed to share this information with the Americans.
I've seen quotes from American intelligence officials that say that the Canadian investigation was essentially just a fold to political pressure, that knowing what they know now, that they would still do the same thing. They would still detain you. How does that make you feel? How do you respond to that?
Well, unfortunately, this stems from the zero tolerance, I think, policy, whether here it's in Canada, but more so in the US. I think the intelligence community have no, the way they think basically is we don't want to leave anything, for random. So it's called zero tolerance, and what we know now is that there was an inquiry that cleared me. Apparently, the threshold that the Americans or the CIA and the FBI are using are a lot lower than in Canada or other parts of the world. If this is what they want, if this is how they want to continue to do business, I think it is already backfiring.
What was that date you were detained in New York in 2002? Is that the last time you were in the United States?
That's correct.
How long were you there that time?
Well, I was stopped on September 26th, and eventually I was sent to Sierra on October 8th, so about 12 days.
So 12 days. Did you realize the seriousness of what was happening when they first pulled you aside?
No, the first few hours, no, because they kept telling me they only had some few questions to ask me about some individuals, but I did not realize the seriousness until they came and shackled me and took me to the prison. Even then, I thought it would take a day or two. There was some kind of a mistake, you know, until a week later when they presented me with a document claiming that I was a member of Al-Qaeda, and they did not provide any evidence. They just said, based on classified information, we deem you to be a member of Al-Qaeda. So that was really shocking, and I never expected any even 1% of this to happen to me, because I had traveled freely. I had, you know, and what is more shocking is I had always believed prior to that incident that, well, if you're ever in trouble, you could just have a lawyer, for example. You could just call someone to help you. During the entire, especially 2 days of the interrogation at the airport, I kept asking for a lawyer. I kept asking to make a phone call to my family, and they did not allow me. In fact, they told me, you are not an American citizen. You're not allowed a lawyer. So I was shocked, because it was the first time. I had moved to Canada in 1987. So by that time I had lived about, 1997, 15 years. And it was the first time that I started thinking again about whether the values that were being preached here, as, you know, democracy, as freedom, as respect of law, due process, that's when I started questioning those concepts. It was the first time. I've never questioned those before.
Were you ever allowed to see a lawyer in that?
Well, eventually, yes, but under strict conditions. And they lied to my lawyer about my whereabouts. They lied about her about many other things. And I was flown early in the morning, actually around 3 in the morning, to Jordan. And the whole thing is, they didn't allow me. For example, I told them repeatedly that I wanted to see a judge, and they wouldn't allow me to see a judge. So,
did they pick the lawyer, or did you pick the lawyer that you did get to
well,
see?
what happened is, a week later, they allowed me to, after I insisted at the prison, they allowed me to speak to my mother-in-law for like 2 minutes. I asked her to find a lawyer for me. It's basically my family who found the lawyer.
And then the lawyer came to visit you?
That's correct, at the prison.
So did the lawyer give you a sense that, don't worry, this is going to be okay, we can handle this? Or did the lawyer say,
I think it was the government, the U.S. government, used the immigration law as a reason. So on one hand, the lawyer that was hired was immigration, right? Mm-hmm. But when she met with me and she saw the document, she realized it was a more serious matter. Then she had to seek the help of another lawyer. But during that time, they just took action quickly. They didn't allow anyone to respond to the allegation or anything.
Part of their case,
they basically bypassed the normal procedure that they would normally afford to people who they're about to deport.
Part of their case is that the lawyer could have filed a plea to stop you from being sent back before they sent you back, and even up to 60 days after they sent you back, and the lawyer did not do that. Was that the fault of the lawyer? Or?
I don't think it's the fault of the lawyer. They lied to her. For instance, I'll give you one concrete example. They came to me to meet me at the prison around 9 p.m. on a Sunday. They left a message for the lawyer on a Sunday at 6 p.m. about that hearing. I mean, what kind of lawyer is this? Do they expect my lawyer to work on a Sunday evening? So actually, when my lawyer got the message, she had thought that it was a Monday, right? By the time she started to get more information, they were lying to her. They said, you're not going to find him at MDC. And so they basically, they did not, and that interview, by the way, lasted 6 hours from 9 p.m. until 3 in the morning without the presence of my lawyer, even though I told him repeatedly, I do not want to talk to you without the presence of my lawyer. So I think it just appears that whoever took the decision to send me to Syria took it anyway, whether my lawyer filed for this or not. And frankly, when they interviewed me on a Sunday, 2 days later, they sent me to Syria. I mean, we all know from the normal deportation cases, I mean, it takes months and maybe sometimes years for them to but I'm sure some other elements within the government had other plans. They wanted to send me to Syria to be tortured.
To be tortured to get information out of you.
That's correct. And that became clear to me. Initially, I was not sure about that. I frankly doubted until the last minute that they were going to send me to Syria, even though at the airport, they indicated that they wanted me to go there voluntarily. That's why I was worried during this period that I would end up being in Syria. But I never wanted to believe it, because why would the Americans send me there? It's not
It is curious in the sense that, I mean, Syria and the U.S. aren't allies. They're not
correct.
Partners in.
That's correct.
The war
But
on
at that time, I would never. I wasn't really involved in politics to be able to know that. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that made me not believe that they were going to send me is, why would the Americans, a democratic country that respects rule of law, would send me to Syria? I mean, that was, even though I was arrested and I was treated in a bad way, but I really didn't want to believe that, because I said that, why would they send me? It's not only until they put me on a private jet and I was flying over the ocean, that's when I started, oh my God, it's serious now. And it became clear to me during the trip that was the exact purpose why they were sending me there.
Were you communicating with the people on the plane, the people who were holding you kind of in transit?
The people who escorted me?
Yeah, I'm just curious. Were you sitting on the plane talking to these guys?
Initially we did not talk, but they chained and shackled me during the entire trip, except the last 2 hours. They actually removed my shackles and chains, and I was able to move freely. I found that to be strange. I still can't find an explanation for that, because during the entire trip, except again the last 2 hours, I was just being watched, even though I was chained and shackled. Even when I went to the washroom, they would come with me. Except the last 2 hours, I was treated differently. They removed the chains and shackles. They invited me for shish kebab dinner. So, and then I had a chat with the head of the team about, I told him about my fears of being tortured. I could tell he had some sympathy. I don't know if that's true or not, but I could tell in his eyes. He basically told me, why don't you speak to the Jordanians? They may be able to keep you there. Now, I did not know what he really means by then, but I now know. An ex-CIA agent, forgot his name, said basically, if you want someone to disappear, if you want someone to be interrogated, well, you send him to Jordan. If you want someone to disappear, you send him to Egypt. And if you want someone to be tortured, you send him to Syria. Now I understand why he said this, because apparently the Jordanians are not as harsh as the Syrians when it comes to torture.
And how did you know it was going straight back to Syria, that you weren't going to be held in Jordan?
Well, because they did not blindfold me. I was able to see around, and there was a screen similar to the ones we see in private jets. Mm-hmm. In the Boeings and yeah. When we travel, it showed the trajectory of the plane, so I was able to see where we were going.
But that was going to Jordan.
Yes, because what happened is, before they left Washington, what happened is the plane departed from New Jersey, went to Washington, right? Another team of people came on board, and I overheard them talking on the phone, and apparently the Syrians were refusing to take me directly. So they ended up talking to the Jordanians, and the Jordanians cooperated. And they said, give him to us, we'll hand him over to the Syrians. So that's why they sent me to Jordan instead. Even though I'm not a Jordanian citizen. So basically Jordan is very complicit in this.
Is there any part of you that looks at the U.S. government and I guess understands in a way that a year after 9/11 they're trying to stop another 9/11 from happening, that there was no reason to stop Muhammad Atta from coming into the country at the time, but when they're I guess faced with how do we stop it before it happens? You can't wait till they commit a 9/11 to stop a guy like Muhammad Atta. That's what created your situation. How does the U.S. deal with security threats like a Muhammad Atta?
Well, I think there's a false myth out there. There's a myth, call it this, that torture produces good information. It's been proven time and again that torture produces only false information. If not 100% of the time, 99% of the time.
Is this true in your case?
Whoever sent me to Syria, I think believed that under torture, I would probably say thanks, right? That it would be useful to them. So this strategy has failed miserably, not only in my case. If you look at all the other cases, you will see a pattern where torture information or information derived under torture is not reliable at all.
Well, let's go back to that. Describe what you mean by torture in Syria. What happened there?
Well, I think unfortunately the Bush administration redefined the torture issue. For them, it has to be a really extreme form of torture, while the Geneva Convention and the UN definition of torture is very clear. Even sometimes psychological torture is worse than physical torture. And I can tell you that in Syria, for instance, I was beaten with a cable. I was kept in an underground cell that is the size of a coffin, or grave, 6 feet, about 3 feet wide, 6 feet deep, and 7 feet high, for about 10 months and 10 days, underground in the darkness. That alone was a form of torture over an extended period of time.
How often would you get out of that?
Well, they would only allow me to go out like 3 times a day to go to the washroom, or sometimes I went out for interrogations, of course, at the beginning. But I was lucky because of the pressure in Canada my wife helped build on the Canadian government. And what happened is the Canadians were forced to come and visit me every once in a while. So the only times I went out was for interrogation or for the consular visit. Eventually, after 6 months, they allowed me to go out and have some exposure to sunlight. But that's about it. That's about it. 24 hours locked underground. It's darkness except a little bit of faint light coming from the hallway. I mean, it's. I really thought when I saw that place, when they took me to it, and they locked me in, I looked inside and I thought naively that they would keep me there for a day or two, maybe 3 days, to put pressure on me. But I realized over time that was going to be my place for a while.
What did you do with your mind in there?
In that place, you just go crazy. I mean, you're locked.
Could you talk to anyone?
Eventually, yes. Eventually, there were other similar cells around. At the beginning, I was so scared. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know anyone. I really knew nothing. Eventually, I was able to speak to the neighboring cells until like maybe 3 weeks later, until I had some trust that those people were actually prisoners, not. So you're locked up 24 hours. Even those times I whispered with those people, it would be very short. Like if you're ever caught talking, I mean, you're gonna be beaten badly. So
did you learn some kind of mental routine? Like how do you get through that much time alone?
It's tough. I'll just give you some concrete examples. At the beginning, I used to, because to keep in shape, I used to do some push-ups and walk 2 steps in the front, 2 steps to the back, and pace a little bit, right? But I was so physically exhausted after about 5 or 6 months, even push-ups I wouldn't be able to do. Worse yet, the mental condition is terrible, because you're there, right? You don't know what's going on outside. For you, the world went crazy, right? Because how could it be that in a space of a week or two, your life is changed like this, like in a crazy way, without the due process? So in my mind, I'm down there. I have no access to the outside world. The only thing you think about is your family, right? What happened to your wife? What happened to your kids? How are they surviving? I mean, that's tough. It is tough. Like I remember, I had this constant. I had souvenirs, a lot of souvenirs of me being with my wife and my kids, and souvenirs would bombard my brain one after the other. I remember in the
souvenirs, you mean mental souvenirs, like memories?
Yes, memories. Yes.
At some point, the FBI interviewed you and had no interest, but it went to the CIA. It went beyond them.
You rolling? Yep.
Because you ended up in the CIA's hands.
The CIA was involved from early on, I think.
That's the team that took you.
Yes, but the FBI said, well, we've interviewed him, we have no interest in him. What happened is the interest to send me to Syria came from the Department of Justice. Okay? So it came from the high people and the high-level people in the Department of Justice.
Justice
Yes.
decided to send you to Syria.
Yes.
Not the
high-level people. Well, I don't want to. There was consultation. Okay, there was consultation with all the agencies, CIA and FBI, but the ultimate decision was taken at very high levels in the Bush administration. That actually, DOJ played a big part.
Going back to Syria, what was worse, the physical or the mental torture?
Well, at the beginning, it's physical, because you're being beaten and you just want to.
You're saying, I've never heard of this, that they would hit you on your open palms?
Yes,
with
a schoolboy, yeah.
With a electric cable?
Yes.
Is that a common torture technique that I'm just unfamiliar with, or?
Well, eventually I knew more from other people that the torture is in phases. They employ sometimes the least torture technique is insulting, right? Then it moves back up to slapping on the face and kicking and all of that. Then if this doesn't work, it goes up to using the cable. If the cable doesn't work, doesn't work according to them, right? Because they could always believe that you're not saying the truth, right? Then after that they use the tire, and after the tire is the chair, and after the chair is the electric shocks. So they employ those techniques. So the cable is the third in the chain in terms of the severity of torture.
And what do they want out of you?
Well, I think what happened is the Syrians, I know more now about the kind of relationships that existed back then. The Syrians wanted to show the Americans and the world that they are part of this war on terror. They're also, a big player into this. So they cooperated. They just wanted to please and say to people, we are experts at extracting information. So that will be our contribution to war. Of course, there may be some return for that, right? What kind of return, I don't know.
Did it work though? Did they get information?
Well, they got information that is not reliable. And I'm not the only one. Believe me, under torture, at the beginning you try to resist. As a human being, you try to resist as much as you can. And then eventually, when you see that the interrogator is only interested in hearing what he wants, just tell him what he wants to hear. Let me give you more concrete. If they say to me, you committed, I don't know, you were part of 9/11, okay? And they torture me, and I would have said anything.
What did you eventually end up claiming?
Well, at the beginning, the Syrians focused on asking me about my relationship with other people, okay? Then all of a sudden, they said to me, you have been to Afghanistan. So I was shocked.
Have you ever been to Afghanistan?
No. And why this was a surprise to me, because I don't remember being asked about it in the United States. Okay, that was a big surprise. And when I said no, and then of course they start insulting you, and they always accuse you to be a liar, and then you said no, and then eventually they're gonna start kicking, and then eventually they're gonna start using the cable. When they started using the cable a few times, then I said, that's what you want me to say? Yes, I was to Afghanistan. Then they said you were to a training camp. I said no. And that's how it goes. And then again, another set of interrogation. They lock me in a room for a little while to hear other people being tortured, and they bring me back. Sometimes what they do, before they ask questions, they beat you. They beat. Like, I remember the first time they hit me, I remember it vividly because it was really the biggest shock for me. You know, I don't remember my parents beating me. I don't, you know. So I came into the room, and all of a sudden the head of the interrogation team, George Saloom, I mean, I know his name now. He came in without uttering a word, saying nothing. Just, I mean, he basically said, "What is this?" And I said, "It's a cable." I was sitting like this on a chair, and he said to me, "Open your right hand." And I opened my palm like that, and he hit me like, you know, I could tell he was really, you know, there's, you could hit someone, but you could hit him with feeling that it's not the right thing.
Like a sense of reservation?
Yes, but he was really into it. He really, like, I could see the cable reaching the ceiling. It was that, and he hit me like crazy. And now after that, all I remember is jumping up and down, and the pain is so intense. I've often said that, used that Arabic proverb that says, "You will forget the milk that you have been fed from your mother." It is really so intense, and after that you don't. What did I say after that? I don't know, but I remember starting jumping, and then a short while, sometime later, he asked me without saying anything, "Open your left hand," and he did the same thing. And that one in particular, the second one, I remember it hit my wrist, and it was so painful for about that one 6 months. You know, those other beatings on my body, on my palms, maybe 2-3 weeks, I didn't feel them anymore. But that hit on my wrist, it lasted about 6 months.
It just breaks you down to a different level, huh?
It just takes you, like, you know, it basically tells you that those people are ready to do whatever. And now looking back, I realized that that you know, means that you better say the truth, you know.
But you didn't. You told whatever they wanted to hear.
Truth for me or truth for them. It's a different reference point. But let me be clear. After the first week, okay, I could tell in their eyes. They never said this to me directly, but I could tell in their eyes that I had nothing. Like, I could tell in their eyes that if there was no political situation, I was not tortured, I think they would probably have released me. And I could tell in their eyes. Now, after the so-called confession about Afghanistan, they became so excited. That head of the team, George Saloom, he was so proud, and that again told me that they wanted to find something on me that the Americans did not find, so that to claim we are the experts, and here's how we can help you defeat terror. So the whole thing was disgraceful, frankly. It's
and he's still out there.
He's still out there. They're still torturing other people. And unfortunately nowadays it became so obvious. It became so obvious. Before it was just hidden, you know, it was secret. Nowadays it's so obvious that the Western countries, whether it's the US, the UK, and other countries, are cooperating very closely with those regimes, knowing that those. So on one hand, yes, publicly we condemn them for their violations of human rights. On the other hand, we shake hands with the devil. And it's unfortunate.
Do you remember any of the specifics you gave them? That you were involved in certain plots, or you knew people, or do you remember any of the specifics from the information that you gave them?
The ones I remember about is Afghanistan, and I still remember it vividly because that was the main difference between the interrogation in Syria and in the United States. Now, do I remember everything I said under torture? No. Do I remember everything they asked me to say? No. I mean, I only remember vividly the moments where there was a transition, or that moment when they beat me, it's still with me on a daily basis. In fact, from time to time, I have nightmares. I see George, the head of the interrogation team, coming and hitting me with a cable. I fell on the ground. It's still with me. It's still haunting me, and he's very cruel.
To fast forward to today, you were eventually released because of the efforts of your wife and the Canadian government. Why did it take the Canadian government so long to get you released?
Well, governments, they don't take action unless there's pressure. Eventually, frankly, whoever took the decision or whoever conspired to send me to Syria, whether talking here about the Canadian side or the American side, they thought I would never see the light of the day again. And they underestimated what my wife could do. They underestimated the public opinion. Remember, a year after 9/11, you're accused of being a member of Al-Qaeda, and you're sent to the North Pole. Will people care? I don't think people would care. But I think what happened is people started to wake up to this new reality, especially in Canada. They said, well, this is not right. Even if he is who you claim to be, he should have been afforded due process. And that's what my wife was able to exploit. There are a lot of decent Canadians who did not, even though they may have believed what was said about me, but they say this is not the right way to treat people. And so the Canadian government initially thought that I would never see the light of day, right? And because they never want to anger the Americans, they kept silent and they kept indifferent until the public opinion started increasing. That's when they were eventually forced, I would say, to take action. But basically, the Prime Minister of Canada sent a letter to his counterpart in Syria to ask him to release me. But that took about 10 months.
10 months?
Yes.
Of your life?
Yes. 10 months of hell.
That you don't get those 10 months back. I mean, that's just...
Well, it's not only the 10 months, or actually it's a year, because they kept me in that cell for 10 months and 10 days, but eventually they moved me to another 5-star prison, should I call it, compared to that. But I naively thought after I came back to Canada, after I was released, that, well, it's going to take me 6 months to a year to forget about it and just go back to work. But I want people to understand that it's not just a year, okay? It's a life-lasting experience. I still live with nightmares, even though they decreased in intensity and frequency, but it's still there. My name has been tarnished. Even though I've been cleared, it doesn't matter, labels stick. And it's a daily struggle. It's a daily struggle, believe me, whether it's to manage the stress, the post-traumatic stress, or to as simple as, just give you a concrete example, as simple as traveling. I mean, do you, for example, think much when you travel domestically, let's say? It's a given thing, right? For me, it's a huge undertaking to travel from Ottawa to Toronto, for example. It's like I feel pressured, and maybe because it reminds me of, also it reminds me of the crazy world we're living in. You know, I was never expecting to be detained in the US and treated that way. So if it happened to me once, it could happen to me another time.
Do you fly, or do you?
I fly very, very rarely. I do fly very rarely. Yeah, it's I just don't feel safe.
When you came back, you sued the Canadian government and the U.S. government?
That's correct.
The Canadian government, what was the response from that one?
Well, what happened after I came back, some people within the security apparatus, they started a campaign against me to discredit me, knowing that if I was successful in my campaign, I mean, their actions would be exposed. So that alone was another struggle on its own. But eventually, we were able to get a public inquiry in Canada.
So even after you go through this hell and you come back,
That's another type of hell.
they continue.
Of course.
What kind of things were they leaking?
Oh, they leaked the most serious leak was the so-called confession that I gave to the Syrians under torture. At that time, they leaked it after 4 days after I gave my first public interview, where I spoke to millions of Canadians about what happened, and people were so outraged. So the pressure was increasing on them, and they just leaked the information. That was another hell on its own. You know, and
How long did that continue, them leaking things about you?
For about, well, they started the leaks before I came back. When the Prime Minister intervened, Canadian Prime Minister intervened on my behalf, that's when they started the leaks, because it became clear that eventually I was going to be released. So they wanted to undermine the efforts of the Canadian government to bring me back. And then it continued. The leaks became more intense shortly after I came back. So as if it was not enough to go through hell in Syria, those people decide. What is scary is we don't know who those people are.
Even today?
Even today. They're still, most likely they're still in their positions. They probably have been promoted since then.
But the Canadian government officially exonerated you?
That's correct.
Yeah?
That's correct. The public inquiry. And at the same time, I also launched a lawsuit against the Canadian government. And after the release of the public report, in which the judge basically cleared me, also he recommended that the government sit down with me to talk about compensation. The government decided it was in their best interest to settle the lawsuit. And the part of that settlement, the Prime Minister apologized.
So they apologized?
That's correct.
They cleared your name?
That's correct.
They compensated you?
And they also removed me from the Canadian no-fly list.
And the facts that they did that on are public record?
They are all public, yes.
And then your suit in the U.S., what happened with it?
Well, the U.S. government has been putting obstacle after obstacle. My lawsuit was first dismissed in the federal court. We appealed, and
why was it dismissed?
It was based on, I think the government was successful in convincing the judge, the federal judge, that it was a matter of an immigration lawyer, immigration matter.
So it wasn't state secrets, it was an immigration
Exactly, matter. And he just cited, for example, I'll just give you one of the shocking arguments that the government lawyer gave during that hearing. They basically say that I had no right as an alien. If I remember vividly, I think they said even food, I didn't have even right to food. So if they gave me food, that would have been nice on their part. So as far as they went as far as stating this on record. So unfortunately, the judge sided with their arguments. We appealed. Now the Second Circuit Court, the panel of 3 judges, they also sided with the government, 2 against 1. But apparently the dissenting judge was not happy. He said this is not an immigration matter. There's a lot more involved here. And to our surprise, we were about to ask the full panel of that same court, which is composed of 13 or 14 judges, to consider the case before, of course, going to the Supreme Court. But on their own, the judges actually decided to rehear the case. So a few months ago, there was a hearing, or call it rehearing of the case, where all the judges sat down and listened to the arguments of my lawyer and the government's lawyer. So I'm hopeful that this expanded panel would rule in my favor. I hope that they, I can tell you that from the questions I heard during the hearing from some of the judges, I'm very encouraged. At least some of them now are seeing the big picture.
When was that?
When was the hearing? The exact date.
This year?
No. Do you remember the hearing? about 5 months ago.
So that was under the Bush administration still?
That was around December, yes, that was around December 19th or 20th. That's correct.
Do you think things are changing with the change of administrations?
Well, I would like to believe so, but unfortunately, so far we have not seen any encouraging sign on the part of the new administration. I hope they're going to change their position on this case. I hope they realize that it's not in their best interest to keep denying the obvious.
Well, I think the Obama administration has come out and said they're going to close down Guantanamo Bay, that the U.S. does not participate in torture. But you don't see that as enough change?
I think it's a good first step, okay? But I think what needs to happen is the new administration has to not only close Guantanamo, or they have to make sure that those people who were wronged are compensated. They also need to make sure that those people who were involved in torture are brought to justice.
Why? Why do you continue this fight with the U.S.?
Sorry?
Why do you continue this struggle with the U.S. when the Canadian government's already cleared you and,
yes.
and everything
Well,
else?
I think over the past 3-4 years, I've realized that my case is not unique. Okay, it's widespread. After I came back from Syria, I thought I was just one of very few people, but it became clear to me there was a practice by which people were sent routinely to be tortured. So in my case is probably one of the few cases that survived, okay, so far. So I would be cheating. I would be cheating the people who have hope in me, put it that way, the people who lost their case. Because what I would like to do is I would like to draw the attention of the American people about the injustice that has been taking place. And one way of doing this is through the court system. So I've heard from many people who say that, you know, people who lost their cases, like Al-Masri case, for example, or other cases, I think those people need to, their suffering need to be acknowledged. And if I could contribute in small ways to trying to help the American people understand that what happened to those people and what happened to me is big injustice, and this needs to be recognized.
If you could give a message directly to the Obama administration, what would you say?
I think the rendition practice, as well as the cooperation with countries that practice torture, close cooperation, has tarnished the reputation of the American, not only American government, but the American people. I think what this new administration has to do, they have to sit down and look at the past 5 or 6 years. What kind of gains, what kind of concrete gains did they get from engaging in torture? And what kind of gains did they get from cooperating with countries like Syria and others on those matters? In my opinion, this policy has backfired. You know, it's easy to repair relationships with people, but it's not easy to repair a reputation. I think the reputation now, I mean, the United States can't just go to the Middle East and say we're going to spread democracy here and freedom and respect of rule of law. And on the other hand, people see, you know, with all those ways of communication now, TV, satellite, internet, people are reading, people are watching, people are not stupid anymore. So when President Obama goes on TV and insists on the fact that his administration will respect the rule of law, people need to see concrete action. And one way of doing this is to, in my opinion, there needs to be a commission that looks into those atrocities. I call them atrocities because I call them crimes against humanity. And what is that? let's be clear. What we know is I think very little. I think what we know is just the tip of the iceberg. That's why there needs to be a commission that investigates those issues more thoroughly.
Have you lost all faith in America?
I think I've lost faith in the system in America, but I have not lost faith in the people. I think people slowly but surely they are waking up, I think, and realizing that what has been done under the name is not right. In fact, I lived in Boston for about a year and a half. I still maintain some relationship with, I don't think many Americans appreciated what the Bush administration did in this area of national security. I don't think it will take years to repair that reputation. So did I lose faith in the system? I think I'm almost losing faith in the system, but I'm not losing hope in the people.
Do you think torture is still going on under the Obama administration?
I think it is still going on, yes. You just have to read every day on the internet.
Why?
We have some good investigative journalists who why is torture continuing?
Because why do you think torture is still going on under the
Because
Obama?
there are still people who believe that torture could get them good information. And I'm starting to believe, unfortunately, that there are people who don't care about the rights of other people if they don't happen to share the same religion or the same background. I'm starting to believe that, given that it is still ongoing.
Sounds like you have a multi-layered argument against torture here, in the sense that you're saying it's wrong as a human, but you're also saying pragmatically that torture just doesn't work.
Doesn't work. I'm not the only one who said that. Many ex-CIA or agents actually tell you that it just doesn't work.
But not that many people in the world actually have firsthand personal experience of it not working, from your side of.
No, but there are available information now. There are actual cases, concrete cases, where it has been proven that torture does not work. We shouldn't just take this one case out of 100 cases where reliable information was obtained and use it as the norm. But let me be clear. Even if you obtain reliable information from people, torture is not the right way to go.
Why? Why? I mean, is it not a greater good argument that you need that information to protect the greater good, to protect the most amount of people? Well, and of course, people like Maher Arar aren't going to give up that information.
That's right. So that's a good argument. Those people who are not going to give it up, they're not going to give it up. What happens is you torture, and you tarnish your reputation. So, what kind of weight do you give to both? But regardless of this, torture is just wrong. It is just wrong. And believe me, there are techniques nowadays that are a lot more effective than torture. A lot more effective than torture. And I'm not the one who's telling you this. Investigators who are on the field, they could tell you that. They could tell you they could use non-violent techniques that could get them a lot more reliable information. And that's the way to go.
The Obama administration, for all its talk of change, hasn't said that, or they've actually said that they won't stop that, I believe, that they still reserve the right to pick up someone, not in the U.S., but in another country, and to take them somewhere else for questioning. Is that in some way, in your mind, I guess, is that okay? Or?
Well, I think we have rules and regulations. We have something called international law. Rendition, obviously and clearly, is against international law. If there are agreements between countries, if you happen to suspect someone of being engaged in terrorist activities, well, there are rules for that. Why do we have to pick up this person and fly him over to his country of birth and get him tortured? I just don't understand why we would have to do that, unless we do not have evidence of against this person. If there's no evidence against this human being, he should be considered innocent until proven guilty. And the way to prove he's guilty is through the court system. So if he happened to be or if the government believes that he's engaged in terrorist activities and they have the evidence to support it, then they should just ask that country to extradite him. Just use the normal extradition procedures. Why do we have to go outside the international law in order to achieve those objectives? I really don't understand that.
In your case, there's something else as well. It's not just that they took you seriously for the questioning, but it's the leaks that you talked about afterwards. Those leaks even continue. I mean, fairly recently, I think the FBI has let out some information, right, of saying that you were identified in a photograph in Afghanistan?
Yeah, that was during the hearing in Guantanamo Bay of Maher Arar. Yeah, that was not a leak. I think it was part of a hearing. It was obviously very timed with the end of the Bush administration era, and but the next day on the hearing, under cross-examination, it became clear that this was not the person that was, or basically they put words in the mouth of Omar Khadr to say that.
So you think there's an agenda behind that?
I think so.
What?
Well, those leaks have been ongoing. It's not the first time. I think there are still elements out there who have an agenda to destroy my reputation. My case is one of the few cases that's still surviving, and it's just going to continue unless the government puts a stop to that.
You know, Avi Lewis, who's co-host of this program, interviewed Michael Schur, who's a former CIA analyst, agent, employee, and he said that if he would do the same thing today that he did back then, knowing what he knew back then, he would arrest you today and go through the same process.
Did he say that they would also send me to Syria?
He certainly defended the practice.
Well, let's you know, to be fair, the Americans in their possession had information from the RCMP, which they trusted, you know, because they had cooperated with them for a long time. So that information was exaggerated and misleading, and some of it was false. So prior to my arrival in New York, the Americans had the idea, or had an image about me, right? He's a top dangerous guy, right? So it's their responsibility to just stop me and interrogate me and maybe you know, investigate the matter. So no one is denying that, because they had this information anyway. Whether it's false or correct, they had the duty to do that. What they don't have the right to do is to send me to Syria to be tortured. What they should have done instead, they should have asked me questions and let me continue to Canada. If they had anything or any other suspicion, there is an agreement between the FBI and the RCMP, and the RCMP would have continued their investigation normally. We don't just ship people like that, like parcels, to the Middle East to be tortured.
If your case doesn't, if the judges don't side on your side for the case that they're reconsidering right now, what's your next step in the U.S.? Is this it?
I'm going to wait. I'm not going to answer about that. I'm going to wait until the judges surrender. It is my hope, really, that this new administration looks at the case differently. There are positive signs. I see that this new administration took a different position on, like the, you know, even though some of them are symbolic. There are discouraging signs, but I do hope that they look at those matters differently. Not only my case, there are people who have been wronged, but let me be more clear, okay? Even we tend as human beings to be more indifferent to those people who were tortured, because some of them may actually be guilty of something, right? But we don't torture whether it's guilty, this person is guilty or innocent. We just don't torture. We don't do that. We shouldn't do that. It doesn't matter if the person is guilty or what kind of suspicion we have about this person. Torture should not be in our dictionary. And I hope this new administration understands that, not only by words. You know, you know, I've heard President Obama saying encouraging things about torture, that we don't torture, but people need to see action. And one way of showing action is to order an investigation, to order a commission, and in order to investigate the past practices of the previous administration.
There are two schools of thoughts on this. A group of people that have a lot of hope in Obama. It seems like you may be in that group, and there's people who say,
I don't want to. I don't want to say I have a lot of hope. I'm gonna have to wait and see. But what I'm saying is, I've seen encouraging steps as a first step. It's a good thing, but we shouldn't. At the same time, we shouldn't be too hopeful. We have to wait. It is fair to say that the president needs some time to change things. I think he's very preoccupied with the economy right now, but I don't think this matter is less important than the economy, and it is my hope that they will look at those issues seriously.
Thank you so much.